Okay, we're going to get started, folks. My name is Andrew Goff, and I'm the Managing Director of GCD Technologies. I'm here with my colleague and Head of Design at GCD, Greg Dalrymple. And today we want to talk to you about the value of great when it comes to digital experiences. Over the past 21 years, we have actually been building software for organizations across the world with a strong focus on creating great digital experiences. I'm long enough in this industry now, though, to remember when all software pretty much looked like this. Yeah, and I'm actually always disappointed when I find that some software still does look like that, especially when it comes to enterprise software. The more important point we want to make today, though, is that it's not actually how your software, your website, or your apps look, or even the technology that they use that's important. It's how they make people feel and what they're able to achieve that actually makes all of the difference. If you're watching live and have any questions during the session, please go ahead and add them to the chat panel, and we'll try to pick some of them up during the session. Today, as I said, we're talking about digital experiences. Many of you will have heard the term user experience, or maybe even customer experience. But we actually want to zoom out one step further and look at the human experience and explore the ways in which we as humans interact with the digital experiences and how that fundamentally impacts our reality. This topic is definitely not new. There are lots of great products and services that allow you to track customer successes and review user experience. But most of these tools focus on the B2C market. By optimizing your customer experience, it's actually really easy to see a direct correlation on customer satisfaction, brand loyalty, and hopefully your bottom line. What's often forgotten, though, is how the same humans that are consumers are also actually in large part your employees, your suppliers, and your B2B customers. Yet we don't often apply the same high expectations around the experience of using our internal tools as we do with our consumer-facing websites and apps. Today, we hope to convince you of the importance of caring about the human experience of all of your digital tools, both internal and external, how you can measure customer and employee satisfaction in your digital experiences, some techniques on how to identify how software is being used in unexpected ways, and how you can spot the biggest opportunities for improvement in your business. Beyond that, we hope to convince you that these things shouldn't be the sole responsibility of the IT or the marketing departments, which is where they often fall. And instead, the whole organization should be aligned with the idea that in an increasingly digital world, focusing on improving our human experience not only increases satisfaction, it allows us to be more productive and profitable. It's hard to talk about the concept of digital experiences without talking about digital transformation. Like many technology terms, digital transformation is one of those open to broad interpretation of what it actually means, and actually how it differs from what we've already been doing and what's already been happening for over the past 35 years as software and technology have become even more embedded in our businesses. The interesting shift that is being wrapped up in this term digital transformation is that software is no longer employed for specific tasks like accounting or word processing, but it's about looking about how we can deploy technology throughout our organization to actually enable business models and processes that drive brand new value for customers and employees and enable things that simply weren't possible in our ever-changing digital economy. But it's really important with digital transformation to remember that it's not actually about the technology. This is one area where so many organizations get it wrong. It's estimated that in 2018, $1.8 trillion was spent globally on enterprises implementing digital transformation initiatives. But 70% of these initiatives will never actually reach their stated goals. There are so many reasons why these transformation initiatives fail. But the one that we see time and time again is when the decisions are made based on the technology and not the human. The coronavirus pandemic has caused a seismic shift in working practices in organisation, with an estimated 400% increase in working from home during the first couple of months. Gartner predicts that post-pandemic, up to 48% of employees will continue some form of remote working. As a result, many organizations have had to make significant and rapid changes to allow their employees to efficiently work in a distributed way. You just need to look at the meteoric rise in the number of active users of tools like Zoom and Microsoft Teams over the past year to understand how fast organizations have been adopting change. In turn, this is forcing many organizations to accelerate their digital transformation journeys. In doing so, though, it's vitally important that we don't forget about the impact these changes will have on the people both within and outside our organizations. McKinsey and Company, in Beyond Coronavirus, The Path to the Next Normal, riveting read, they talk about how organizations react to black swan events like the 2008 financial crash and the current pandemic. They observe that we go through these 5 stages. The first they call resolve, and that's the period of being very reactionary and doing what needs to be done right now, very much survival instinct mode. And then we move into resilience. And this stage is about short-term planning of what can be done to ensure that we can continue to operate. And then we move into return. And that's really where we're getting back to some level of business. And hopefully then we can move on to reimagine. And reimagine is where we can start to consider what the next normal looks like. We're out and what will happen out the other side of this crisis. Eventually, we can move on to reform, where we have much greater clarity about how the industry has changed around us, and we're now adapting to this new normal. If you're watching us live, let us know in the chat what stage you think you are along this progression. If we look at stage one and 2, they're very much about short-term reactionary steps. We saw this, for instance, with bars and restaurants, which have adopted apps that allow you to order, for instance, food and drink directly from your table. It's unclear if this change will actually survive into the next normal, but they absolutely make sense right now in a climate where safety comes first. The focus now is very much on these safe experiences. We've all become used to physical adaptations with long queues, outside shops and perspex screens. And I think we've actually all become connoisseurs of hand sanitizer too. But there exist many great opportunities to use digital technology to enhance this experience. Even before the pandemic, online chat had massively grown in popularity to bridge the gap between the human contact between the physical world and the digital world. But Currys have actually taken this one step further with their Shop Live offering, in which they launched just as they were having to close their stores across England as a result of the latest restrictions there. Shop Live enables their customers to start a video call with their existing in-store experts. It's a brilliant idea to utilize their workforce and give customers a personalized advice and guidance they need. But it remains to be seen if this is something that they can continue or will want to continue when their stores reopen. It's estimated as a result of the pandemic that we made 5 years worth of digital adoption, and it happened in just 8 weeks. This is a massive acceleration. And as such, it stands to reason that under that extreme pressure, that we maybe actually made some bad calls. And as we move from the return stage to reimagine, it's critical that we start thinking about the quality of our digital experiences in the next normal. Keep talking about this idea of the next normal, but what actually is it? Over the past 9 months, how often have you actually heard the phrase, "This is not normal"? Or, my personal favorite is, "This is unprecedented." As humans, we adapt very quickly to new circumstances we find ourselves in. We also learn a great deal from the changes that happen around us. And as such, no one expects that the day after the virus apparently miraculously disappears, that life will return to normal. But instead, there will be a new normal, and that will be shaped by this experience. The next normal is all about predicting what that new normal will look like. Going back to McKinsey, it's clear that digital excellence in both your customer experience and your employee experience is crucial going forward. Having a digital experience is now very much table stakes, but the quality of that experience can be a strong differentiator. It's expected that the trend of contactless and low contact experiences will continue. This includes wider use of e-commerce, as well as click and collect services, but also extends to business communications, where remote or distributed working will continue to drive the adoption of video calling and other digital collaboration tools. Finally, data and analytics. While analytics will be crucial for continuing to monitor and optimize our adoption of digital tools, data is especially important in the area of AI and machine learning, where the tooling has matured to the point where AI can be used in some really interesting ways to help humans make better, more informed decisions. We're working with a company at present who are using AI to help doctors make quicker decisions, but with improved accuracy, and ultimately providing a better experience to their patients.
Yeah, and I think it's that word experience then that's very much in our vocabulary these days. So whether it's customer experience or user experience or brand experience, it's very clear that this idea of the experience economy and businesses really trying to focus on delivering good experiences for their customers, that's very much still with us. And of all these different categories of experience, they all have a relationship to each other. Right down at the coalface then we have user experience, which is just that experience that someone has whenever they use a particular product or service. Customer experience then goes beyond that to describe that totality of interactions that someone has with your organization, and that's over time. But digital experience is obviously the digital part of that. But I think there's this really interesting question now of, is there something beyond that? And are we moving beyond this idea of user experience and customer experience into things like human experience and that employee experience? So there was a quote from the Netflix Social Dilemma documentary that really struck a chord with me. And it said that there are only two industries that refer to customers as users. One is IT and the other is the illegal drugs trade. And certainly as a UX designer myself, that really that made me think just about how we use that term. I mean, nobody wakes up as a user in the morning. We all wake up as these kind of messy, illogical humans then with all of this baggage and biases, and most importantly, these emotions. If I were to show you this grid of logos here, it's likely that everyone is going to have a slightly different emotional reaction based on all the cumulative experiences that you've had with these brands. So maybe there was this time when your taxi was late, or your Starbucks was cold, or the barista was rude to you, or there's just this bug in the Tesco's website that really irks you every time you use it. And all of those put together are really going to color your opinion of these brands. So if we were to turn the spotlight on ourselves, what kind of emotional reaction would our customers have to our brand, which is an interesting thing to think about. So what about this term of human experience that's emerging then? So it was touched on in the Social Dilemma documentary from a social media angle, but it really goes beyond user and customer experience, and it's the complete emotional experience that a person has with your brand or service, both physical and digital, and really goes beyond your customers to include your workforce and partners. So it's a huge, lofty, kind of grand term, but why is it important, and especially for business? So as we spend more and more of our working lives kind of buried deep within these digital tools, and certainly as the world becomes much more digital and more remote and distanced, and more in this connection is happening online, it tends to separate us then from the actual humans who we're dealing with and who we're connecting with. And it's very easy to forget that there's a person at the other end of the chat window or the interaction. Obviously, nobody wants to be known as this faceless customer or user. So human experience is really a mindset and an approach that places human needs very much at the center of everything that a business does. It starts to introduce these things like empathy and well-being and happiness into the equation. And really, what we're trying to do is design better experiences for humans and not for users. Just imagine the impact of designing software that actually makes people happy in the end. But what about the cost of poor digital experience then? And why does good digital experience even matter? The benefit of good customer experience then from that consumer perspective is obviously well documented. In a recent study here by McKinsey, again, they reported that customer experience leaders outperformed laggards. They suffered less and they rebounded stronger from the last recession. And they also found that the customer experience leaders, they tend to grow revenue 3 times faster than those who lag behind. So that idea of the customer experience, the benefit of it is very well understood in the consumer world. But what about the digital experiences for the workforces and the B2B customers? We don't tend to place the same importance on tracking and measuring the experience for these people. And then what's that impact if we don't actually get it right? So I think we should start by considering then what kind of experience that people actually expect now. So the idea of the commoditization of IT and technology means that we just take all these innovations for granted now. This prevalence of bring your own device to work means that employees are expecting the same standards from their business software as they do from the software they use every day in their personal lives. And we can see this reflected in modern web application design. And when it comes to software that businesses use, now they're having to compete with the very best experiences in the world, just regardless of the industry that they're in. I mean, we all know what a good frictionless experience looks like. And software is absolutely so ubiquitous now in our lives. It's ingrained. And we're accustomed to using products like Netflix and Instagram and YouTube, which are just so good now that they really set these really high expectations in our minds of how digital technology should work, which can be very frustrating then when we have to move to other software that falls short of this. I mean, we just take things like speed and performance, usability, reliability, the way these systems connect, all for granted. And we get really frustrated when parts of them don't work. But even industry leaders like Apple and Amazon, they're guilty of disproportionately placing more focus on the consumer-facing products than the products that they have for their employees and enterprise. And I think if you've ever tried to use Amazon AWS, you'll understand this. So why shouldn't we expect the same from the digital tools that we use every day? In fact, those systems really have the potential to frustrate us the most and have such a huge impact on our working lives. But what is that impact? In the consumer world, then it's going to mean things like abandoned carts, maybe more customer churn, more support calls, a drop in your conversions or retention rate, and ultimately leading to that loss of customer and brand loyalty. And as Andy said, there's plenty of tools there available to make use of these metrics and make them easy to track and measure. But in the world of enterprise software and business systems, then the downsides of these negative experiences are going to be things like increased training costs, more development spend, and inaccuracy of your data, wasted revenue, and in the end, a decrease in job satisfaction and productivity for the people who are actually using it. And those are things which are much more difficult to track and measure, and there's certainly less attention now on doing so. So often people just have to put up with a system because it's their job, it's what they have to do. But it does come at a cost. In this really insightful study in 2019 by G2 called The State of Software Happiness, they surveyed more than 1,600 professionals to find out what the impact of software had on things like employee productivity, satisfaction, and job retention. What they actually found was more than half of those employees were unhappy at work because of the software that they used. And they found that 62% of them felt that they weren't actually achieving their professional potential because of software, and it was holding them back. And even more staggeringly, they found that about a quarter of these employees had actually considered leaving their job because of poor software. And I think the impact that has on staff turnover alone is really insightful. And I would encourage people to go and read that report. It is a very it's eye-opening when you look at the impact of poor digital experience, and certainly within a business setting. On a larger scale, then there's a well-known brand example that demonstrates really that cost of failure. So back in 2013, the global cosmetic firm Avon had to pull the plug on an $125 million software project when they found that actually during the pilot program that the iPad app was just too difficult to use and it wasn't fit for purpose. So they had to pull the plug on the whole thing because of that. And even worse then, it caused the salespeople, many who had been there for years, to actually leave the company in droves. So an absolutely huge and expensive failure. And when you think about even the indirect cost that would have incurred, it's just massive. So how could they have got it so wrong and make such a catastrophic failure? Well, they're not alone. After about a decade of research then by multiple top analyst firms, it's been shown that between 30 to 60% of CRM projects actually fail, and those failure rates aren't improving, which is just an incredible number. And you might wonder how that could happen. You know, what mistakes are being made to cause that? So some of the main reasons why the CRM projects fail, they're down to things like a lack of clear goals or poor data, maybe not involving the IT department or involving them too late, maybe failing to have that executive sponsor. But I think most importantly, they fail due to no involvement then from the actual end users whenever they're designing or choosing the system. In fact, they reported that up to 70% of these CRM projects fail because of a lack of user adoption. And I mean, what that boils down to really is that friction has been introduced. And friction then, when experienced every day by the people who use the software, is going to lead to frustration, it's going to lead to failure, and it's going to lead to this lack of user adoption. So it really highlights the importance and that value of getting the experience right, and just making sure that the system is designed specifically around the needs of the people who are going to use it day in, day out. Quite often, and we would even find this ourselves, the people who are making the software purchasing decisions aren't actually those who are going to be using it every day, and that can lead to some of these issues that are demonstrated in these examples.
Absolutely. Look, thanks, Greg. Hopefully you're starting to see now that there really is a cost to poor digital experiences, but the road to good experiences isn't actually always clear. After 20 years of building software for all types of businesses, we have seen plenty of successes and failures along the way. But and what we've tried to do is sort of distill our learnings down to some recommendations on how to improve the digital experience. We've broken that down into three main areas. Firstly, it's about mapping and understanding your journeys. Then it's about measuring the impact, and finally learning and then repeat. Greg, do you want to talk us through mapping the journey?
Yeah, so this first part of mapping the journey, it's hugely important. And it's something from a design and a UX perspective that we go through with our clients all the time. So fundamentally then it's about trying to understand the actual path and all of the interactions, both physical and digital, that a person takes whenever they go through some end-to-end process. The processes can be long and they can involve multiple touch points, lots of different channels. But the most important aspect we find is to look at each part then and identify those areas where there's going to be that potential to really frustrate or confuse. I mean, I went through a process recently with curries that really confused me. So I was ordering a product which I was going to click and collect. Went through a fairly standard checkout process, got the usual thanks for your order emails, so no issues there. On the day that I was going to pick up my, and then I received this email from DPD. So this confused me a little because I hadn't ordered anything else, so I knew this was going to be something related to the curries order. When I went in to track the parcel then, I found that it had already been delivered, and it had been signed for by Rhonda. Now, the interesting thing is here that my neighbour is actually called Rhonda. So I just skipped past the rest of the information in that and marched around to her house to pick up my parcel. When I got there, though, the parcel hadn't been arrived. She hadn't signed for anything. And of course, it wasn't until I came back later, reread the email, that I realised my stupidity, but I realised that wasn't actually my neighbour Rhonda, but that was a worker at the Curry store. And a few hours later, then I got the email to say, all ready to collect, you can go and pick up your item. So what this really highlighted for me then was that they had overlooked a part of that journey, and it left me, highly frustrated, a little embarrassed. And what they were actually guilty of was providing too much information rather than too little. So why do I even need to know that DPD are the courier here, or that they've delivered the item to the store? I really just need to know when that the item's ready to be collected. So they left just enough ambiguity in that part of the journey that it caused confusion. So if couriers were to really look at that journey, and if they were in tune with each part of it, then they would realize the confusion that could occur as part of that click and collect process. So I know my example may have been a little bit unlucky there, but I still think that by taking more care over that end-to-end journey, surely they could spot the potential for confusion at that step. So how do you map out a journey? Well, you might have heard of these lengthy and complex customer journey mapping exercises that you can do, which are definitely have their use. They're very useful. But in the beginning, you might not need to go as far as that. So, even a back of the napkin flow chart sketch could be a solid start that you could do to map out all your journeys. But there's a method I particularly like. It's from the designers over at 37 Signals, who create the software Basecamp, where you sketch out these simple flows in this way. So at the top, you list out what the person sees, and in the bottom, you list out what the person does. And fully mapped out, that example might look something like this. So it doesn't take very long to do, and it's a really good way to map out each of your user journeys. So what do you do whenever you've got all these journeys together, you've got them all mapped out? Well, you should rank and prioritize these journeys then, and focus on the most valuable ones first. So are there any that might need overhauled straight away? Which ones do your workforce or your customers go through daily? And then which ones have the largest impact on job satisfaction and customer loyalty? I think one thing that's really important to remember when mapping out these journeys is that it's important to map it around how people actually use your software, and not how the software is designed to work. So I really love this image because it highlights the fact that people won't always use something as you have actually designed it. Another thing you can do then is apply this idea of the peak end rule to your journeys. So this comes from user experience and psychology. And it says that as humans, we have these cognitive biases that change the way that we recall events. So we tend to focus on the most intense parts of the journey and then the end. But we can use this thinking to our advantage when we look at all these user journeys. So we can identify the parts of the overall experience that really have that potential to be the most frustrating or the most rewarding, and optimize those, and then make sure that the end of that journey is really a positive one.
Moving on to measuring impact, there are plenty of tools in the world of customer experience, but when it comes to employee experience, there's certainly not the same level of focus. We're starting to see more tools appear in this area, and there are also fully fledged behavioral analytics platforms for measuring digital experience. I have to make special mention to local startup Adoreboard, who have established themselves as a real leader in this area of human experience insights. All of these tools definitely have their place. But if you're at the beginning of your journey, some of them may be overkill right now. So what we thought we'd do is offer a few recommendations of how you can get started measuring today. Firstly, have you ever actually gone through the end-to-end process of your key journeys yourself? Have you actually captured orders and put them through your system, or signed up to your product or service as an actual user and gone through the full process, real credit card details? Have you ever watched your team as they use your software systems? Have you observed how often they sigh or sit and watch a blank screen waiting for it to do something? For your consumer-facing websites and apps, have you ever observed, now without talking and telling them what to do, as someone tries to complete a transaction for the very first time? I can guarantee that you will find this an enlightening experience and will highlight many areas that could be improved. Next, tracking emotion. We've talked about emotion a fair bit throughout this talk, it's the one thing that really separates user experience from human experience. There's a wealth of in-depth UX techniques being used now, from eye tracking to facial recognition, but you might actually want to start with a simple self-reported emotion. We've seen devices like is on the screen in supermarkets and airports as a way to gauge a quick customer emotion. And the key here isn't a lengthy feedback survey that I, as a user or a customer, have to give up a lot of my time to complete on your behalf. But it's just to get a quick indication. We can do something similar in the digital realm. Don't worry about the detail. It's actually about tracking, the relative tracking over time that is really important here. Another important aspect is looking at predicting our failures and looking at the errors that happen within our systems. As humans, we're hardwired with a negativity bias. We have a tendency to intensely recall those negative aspects of an experience. A single flaw in your app or website can counteract all the hard work that you've put in to creating great experiences. And that's demonstrated in multiple usability studies where users will say nothing when the UI or the user experience meets their expectations, but they're hugely critical of a website if they find a single flaw. And that doesn't have to be a flaw in the planned user experience. That can just be an error that it happens that they weren't expecting. Look for these unlikely events that negatively impact your digital experience. How does the system deal with technical difficulties like server outages and unavailable content? Mapping journeys that pay attention to these situations can actually often guide your users through the experience, limiting the damage of the error itself. Another important thing Greg touched on earlier is about identifying the workarounds and limitations within your system. We talked about how we as humans are good at adapting. And while we don't like change, we find ways to work with what we have. This is especially true in software. All too often, we see people coming up with workarounds to get the job done when software is standing in their way. There are classics like the just put a full stop in all the required fields that you need to bypass, or using the notes field to basically do everything that the system doesn't do, including putting an account on stop, or the fact that people put their passwords on sticky notes stuck to the side of their monitor, mainly because you're forcing them to actually change their passwords regularly. These workarounds become ingrained and are shared and even sometimes make their way into training. Eradicating these not only improves the quality of the experience, but also the quality of your data. Where these workarounds are a result of limitations on your software, be prepared to push back. It's a limitation of the system, or there's no API for that, are sort of common responses you might get. But if it's important enough, there's often a way to find a way to make the change. But if you're actually having to make too many compromises, you might need to ask, is the software you're using right for you? Or are there other ways that you can achieve what your business requires?
And finally, that last stage then is about learning and repeating. So whether we're seeing a drop off in mobile traffic or an increase in time spent processing customer orders, it's likely that there's some part of that digital experience that we've mapped out that isn't quite right and could be made better. So it's critical that we learn about what's not working with these digital experiences, and then we know about the parts of the journeys that might need to be reimagined and made better. And as Andy was saying, measuring that impact of the digital experience is really the first step in trying to build that knowledge. But it's what you do with that knowledge that's even more important. We have to figure out the lessons to be learned then and implement that change. At GCD, then we would sometimes advise clients to take a lean startup approach to development. So we build to meet those initial needs, measure the impact of them, and then learn from the results and repeat that. And it really is that learn and repeat cycle that makes the most difference, certainly over time. So keep an eye on those journeys and evaluate how things like job satisfaction, employee retention, and even brand loyalty are being affected as you make changes over time. But it shouldn't be changed for change's sake. So it has to be a deliberate attempt to try and improve something. We can take a leaf out of the world of agile development here, where we make small improvements over and over again that really lead to something larger and in the end, much more transformative.
Sorry, folks. I think my audio went there.
I think your audio went, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. So the question here is, are you ready for the next normal? Are your current digital experiences both internally and externally fit for your business now and into the future? And if not, what are you going to do about it? There's a significant cost to poor digital experiences. As businesses move into that reimagine phase and people expect more from their digital tools, now is the time to start to map your journeys for the next normal and measure your customer and employee experience and supercharge your digital future. Look, thank you very much for listening. We've got one question in from Soro directed at you, Greg. So I'll let you first go if you like. And he's wondering whether how much the role of changing market and consumer dynamics play in the failure of CRM initiatives.
So it's interesting that most of the reasons they gave for those failures for the CRM projects were down to things like capturing the wrong requirements or the lack of real goals. So I think if you understand really from the people you're building this for, the exact requirements, why are you building this and what they're going to do with it day in, day out, then that can really, I guess, shore up the whole CRM project and never guarantee you a good result, but it can get you closer. I think it's interesting just when we look at that, where businesses are going now within certainly the pandemic, as we look to then reimagine what this kind of next normal is going to look like. That will mean that there's going to be lots of change in market and consumer dynamics there. So I guess nobody knows the future, but we can hopefully start to see now some of these changes might stick and prepare for them.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, the thing that we see time and time again as to why these CRM systems actually fail is more down to friction. It's more down to the fact that if they're not making the job easier, if they're adding extra work, or if there are areas within the system that are slow or cumbersome to use or involve you to go in and out of screens, if the user isn't actually seeing the benefit of using the software, if they're not experiencing the benefit, then their impetus to use it reduces, and you're already off to starting to fight a losing battle, and eventually teams lose the will to keep pushing these things forward. You can mandate it as something that is required, but But eventually you start to get those issues, and as Greg pointed out from the G2 survey, where people actually start to evaluate their job based on the software that we're using. So certainly that's the thing that we see time and time again.